Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Rosenberg. Welcome to another edition of Green TV. This is where we tell you all the news that the networks and other mainstream media outlets fail to do. They give you the headlines, we go deeper, and we are going to go deep back into history today. I'm very honored to have John Perlin as my guest. He is a professor of physics at UC Santa Barbara. He's been there for more than 17 years. He is the author of 4 books, and if I read all the titles and subtitles, we'd be here too long. I'm going to let him refer to them. At least one of them, I think several, are about the history of solar power, like the 6,000-year history of solar power. And he really looks at where Earth, atmosphere, sun all come together. And he's very concerned about climate change, of course, or he wouldn't be on Green TV. And he's done some really interesting research, and that's what we're going to focus mostly, but not entirely on today. And that is about a woman, yes, a woman, named Eunice Foote, who actually is the mother of climate change. She actually made the initial discovery, the first brick, I believe is how John put it, in connecting the dots between greenhouse gases and atmospheric warming. We're going to find out why we haven't heard of her yet, most of us anyway, and why 162 years ago she did something revolutionary, truly historic, and yet her story, as in history, her story has yet to be fully told. Welcome to Green TV, John. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
So what got you interested in looking into the history of this most remarkable woman? She truly was, a trailblazer, and yet her work, I don't know if you discovered her work or it just was little known and you decided to shine a spotlight on it with the manuscript that you've done and a talk you've given. What got your attention on Eunice Foote and her contributions to climate change, science, and history?
Well, after finishing my hardcover of Let It Shine, the 6,000-year story of solar energy in 2014, there was one unique chapter about Horace Benedict de Saussure, who developed a box, which is called a hot box, which is covered with glass and allows the visible radiation to enter the box, but that radiation turns into heat and has difficulty escaping from the box. And that became, in the early 1820s, the model for global warming. But so I started searching, did anybody else do any work in that time period? And then I found an interesting article by Ray Sorensen on Eunice Foote. However, he said that while she might have been the discoverer of climate change, perhaps she wasn't, because she was never published. And so therefore the mantle went to the person who currently is recognized as the father of climate change, John Tyndall. So I asked the questions I usually do for my research, was she published, or was this just a factoid, as Sorensen suggested, by a journalist? So there I began my research, and what I discovered was that she was first of all published in the leading journal of science in the U.S. at the time, the American Journal of Science. But also, as I followed the trail, she was published also in Europe. And so that whetted my appetite to go even further. And what I learned was an amazing story of a woman who grew up in what was at that time called the American Frontier, which is upstate New York, and went on to do actually several major scientific works, not only on climate change, but also on atmospheric electricity that Tesla gets the credit for. And at both times, she has undisputed priority over this guy, John Tyndall, who stated that no one had looked into this before until he did. And today, you have various institutes, especially in the UK, under his name, the John Tyndall Center for Climate Change. And this created tremendous animosity between me and various male scientists throughout the world because, they, I guess they really stuck to Tyndall. This was their boy, right? And so they wanted to make sure that I had a difficult time getting this story out. And the only person who really supported it was a female graduate student at the Tyndall Center. So it's been a real eye opener to me because of the fact that I got a lot of flack, especially when the symposium was announced to the world by Andy Rivkin. He's a very well-known journalist.
He was on my radio show several times. He's a friend. Yes, a climate journalist going way back. He goes back even farther than I did, something like 40 plus years covering climate.
So what happened, to my surprise, was that a skeptical scientist actually connected me to Andy Rivkin, and I told him I got a nice recommendation from this scientist, and I told Andy Rivkin about the symposium, and he actually announced it in the Washington Post, which really got the created a ruckus in the scientific world, because it was not only just a Santa Barbara thing, but then it became like a worldwide thing. And so people like sent emails to the various scientists who were important at University of California, Santa Barbara, not to do the symposium. And fortunately, they discussed it with me and went with it.
I can't believe, sadly, I can believe what happened to Eunice Foote in her day, that she did not get proper recognition, because we've at this point heard too many of these stories. She, of course, could not have known, nor could anyone 162 years ago, just how important global warming, now climate change, climate crisis was going to be in terms of challenge biggest ever to humanity. But I'm really shocked and appalled that you, in this time period, fairly recently, I guess, got this pushback just for trying to expose the truth that a woman actually was the original connector of dots that were so critical in understanding climate change.
Well, I was too, because what I did was I said, like, if people have other views, they're invited to participate and have a forum, and that wasn't acceptable. And it continues to this moment. I don't know if I sent to you the Washington Post recent article about Eunice Foote and the biographer of John Tyndall, who is actually a really nasty guy. Okay, this was really interesting. As I was doing my research, I called Smithsonian, because they had a couple of files on Eunice Foote and in their archive, and I gave them a little background, and the woman on the phone almost went apoplectic, because she started saying, Tyndall did the same thing, ironically, to the man who introduced and read her paper in 1856. And so that got me into a whole new search, because what happened was, and I found this work because I was invited to the University of California, Santa Barbara Physics, by a Nobel laureate, Walter Cohn, and I found that the scientists behave very much this way, like they want the as I think the poet Ezra Pound said, they want the pomegranate for themselves, And so this guy Tyndall attended a dinner in his honor by Joseph Henry when he was visiting the U.S. And Henry discussed how sound could be passed through fog, which led to the development of the foghorn. And so then 3 years later, when Tyndall claimed that as his own idea too, in a book called Sound, which I was directed by the former head of the National Science Foundation to look at, because he was the one who was leading me to show that John Tyndall behaved this way to even a prominent American scientist who was male.
So Tyndall is, I think you said he commits the sin of omitting key people as he claims credit.
Well,
A figure that sounds like a former president we had.
Right. Actually, he was also an out-and-out racist. In fact, there was this scandal in Jamaica where the governor general had fired on a group of protesting Black people, and there was this whole brouhaha among the scientists in the UK, and Tyndall took the position that the only way to handle, I don't want to use the word, was to whip them. And he was also a misogynist, which actually, as I show in my manuscript, which I hope will get published someday, is he married a woman 30 years younger than him. And in the last years, he was a lifetime insomniac who was always on drugs. It's kind of a fascinating story, and alcohol. And so he was warned by friends that he was really irritating his wife. And then eventually, an accident in getting him his medications killed him. And the person who was serving the medications was his aggrieved, wife.
So are there any descendants of Eunice Foote? Are there any attempts to do a documentary about her contribution? I know you've got a manuscript. What else should we look forward to in terms of more of the world hearing about this real big oversight?
Well, I've gone. I actually walked in her footsteps through her career physically. I visited actually her homestead in East Bloomington, New York, which of course, as we talked about before, you have no idea where it is, even though you're from New York. And it's about 8 miles from a place called Canandaigua, and about 8 miles. And this is what makes the story for me more interesting, is the different movements that were happening in her lifetime that were very influential on her. In fact, 8 miles away from her homestead was where Mormonism was founded, and also where Joseph Smith was. He was forced out of New York because they thought the stuff was like grifting, and then also Canandaigua was one of the outposts for the Underground Railroad. Could have leave Rochester because Rochester is right on Lake Ontario, which was the road to freedom, and also which is very applicable to today. There was this big battle between religion and the advent of science in the area where she was living, and the school she went to, which we talked about, which is in Rensselaer. It was founded by Amos Eaton, who is the father of American science. He was called the evangelical of American science.
We got American technology phones ringing somewhere. Hopefully, yeah, they're stopped. Well, I don't want to cut you off, but we have so many things to talk about. Not only this incredible bit of history, but also the future of sun power. Since you're such an expert.
What I'd like to mention is you said that
Yes.
people were not concerned about global warming back then. In fact, they were, because one of the great questions was in geological science was why did the Devonian period, which was about 400 million years ago, or a little began a little earlier, why was it like a greenhouse climate, and why afterwards it cooled down? And the Scientific American, 3 weeks actually after Eustis' paper was read, they had a amazing article called "Ladies in Science." Oh, I'm sorry, "Ladies in Condensed Gases." And
now it's ladies who lunch. Yeah.
yeah. And so what was interesting about it was they first argued that most of the people who read their journal had that wrong-headed notion that women could not do science. And they said that's totally like blasphemy. And the only reason why they weren't prominent in science was because of the prejudices of the day and also their onerous tasks. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, it just reminds me, I happen to know about the story of Rosalind Franklin. You must know about her as well. She was critical in the discovery of DNA and was not given credit. A man stole her thunder and happened to be friends with her namesake, Rosalind Franklin. And she has taken it upon herself to look into this. And now they've dedicated a whole wing of the school where she did this. I'm trying to remember where it is, but check it out, Rosalind Franklin. And at the time she got zero credit or very little. And she really was, what like Eunice Foote was really key.
I'm very familiar with Rosalind Franklin.
I thought you'd be.
And actually, I think it was Crick who convinced her assistant, who was a male, that he was being a wimp by being under a woman, and convinced him to give the images that she had taken to further his career and get the Nobel Prize.
All too familiar.
But to get to the point is that the question was why were periods after the Devonian cooler? And they said, well, finally, Eunice Foote showed the reason is because all the carbon dioxide was taken out of the atmosphere by the coal beds. And of course, that's what we've been doing, is the opposite, is burning those coal beds and recreating a greenhouse world. So I found as I went along my research, contemporaries really resounding in their impression, very much impressed by her work. But what happened was, and this is, I'll send you the document if you're interested, is in 1880, there was what they called the misogynist dinner of the American Chemical Society. And they actually used what was the fighting device of the day, a solar-powered phone that was invented by Alexander Graham Bell. And it would also be powered by candlelight. So they placed it at the dinner, which was led by the Tyndall's biggest supporter in America, who was also the former head of the American Association for Advancement of Science, and it's called the Misogynist. And this is like a document that was printed in 1880, called the Misogynist Dinner of the American Chemical Society. And it was an amazing document that I got my hands onto. And so you can start to understand why Thomas Sterry Hunt was the man, and he was the biggest supporter of Tyndall in America. and he was a powerhouse. And so Tyndall's ideas, sort of overwhelmed anyone else's ideas at the moment, and we're continuing that live to this moment.
Speaking of powerhouse, the sun is the ultimate power, at least in your focus. Right. I believe you worked on a documentary called The Power of the Sun, and the 6,000-year history of the sun, which I haven't read yet, but you're not very ambitious, are you, John? Tell us what is the realistic, practical application of the sun, because everybody now, or anyone paying attention, realizes we are in a bit of a jam here climatically, and that we have to do everything yesterday. We've done a good job of kicking the carbon can down the road a couple of decades. What can the sun do if we only can get our political act together? And technologically, we've certainly seen that it works, but on a global scale, what's even possible? And if you were president or king of planet Earth, what would you make happen? Because you know the sun better than most of us.
Well, actually, what the book shows is that there were various solar revolutions over the last 6,000 years. The first solar revolution was in architecture, where the ancient Chinese began, and then the Greeks of antiquity and the Romans continued. It was what we call solar architecture, where you build so the sun scoops in. So the building scoops in the sunlight during the colder months of winter, and is built to keep that heat out during the hotter months. And but to enable that, entire cities were designed so every house could enjoy solar heat in wintertime and avoid it during summertime. And you had some of the greatest writers of antiquity, like, for example, Socrates, and also Aristotle, developing solar plans for this kind of architecture. And also Socrates was quoted as giving a lecture on what we call passive solar architecture. So first we should build houses so they don't avoid the sun in wintertime and take in all the heat in summertime. And it's very simple, but since the Industrial Revolution, we failed to do so.
What can we do now? What can we do now?
Well, we can do everything. We can, for example, do smart windows. Also, it is important to mention that we had a huge solar water heater industry at the turn of the century in Southern California, and then it went to Florida, then it went to Israel and Cyprus, and then to China. So we have that technology, which takes a lot of greenhouse gas, which we call natural gas, to heat. But also, as I write in the new edition, which is coming out in February of Let It Shine, that photovoltaics now, which are solar cells that directly convert sunlight into electricity. And I want to emphasize that not sun heat, but sunlight is magically converted into electricity. And today it is the cheapest form of generating electricity. It's really like half the price of nuclear. And the only thing that stands in the way are special interests that want to continue their money-making activities. Because solar cells produce electricity at much cheaper prices today than any other form of electrical generation. So it's not like something in the future. We're in the solar revolution today.
We are, and yet we have so much a transition to make so fast. Are you optimistic that we can do this? Everyone's on renewable energy. Finally, people realize sun and wind and even hydrothermal power are the keys to our future, to our survival. And we certainly have seen a huge growth in solar. I mean, when I started reporting on the Green Beat a couple of decades ago, I was calling it a 30-year overnight success. The solar industry got hot. And it's, of course, much hotter now. And it's not so much an overnight success, but it needs to exponentially grow to fully exploit to the best purposes the power of the sun.
Well, actually, what's very interesting, I show this in my Let It Shine book, is that the idea that the sun can produce electricity without moving parts and without heat. The first solar cell was actually tested in 1873, but it was the discovery of Bell Labs in 1953 that they discovered that the material silicon can actually produce useful amounts of electricity for power. And it's a very interesting story because all the characters who push solar are just the opposite of who you would think. The first was Bell Labs, which everybody hated at the time because it was part of Ma Bell, the big monopoly, and yet it was the biggest solar advocate of the early 1950s. It was there that it was discovered. It was there that was improved. So it produced useful amounts of electricity. Then the first people to run with it was the military in powering satellites, and the first people to put it on the for what we call terrestrial uses was Exxon, and the first practical solar cells on Earth were used to power the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico.
So what the components of solar panels, I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but your knowledge is so vast. I'm trying to tap into some key pieces, things I've wondered about. Do we really, would there be a shortage? I understand that solar panels are made in part from sand. Would there be a sand shortage if we just started producing solar panels en masse and putting them on the rooftops of every warehouse across the land? Like again, assuming the political will finally got, going in the right direction, with no resistance, which is not happening yet, what would be the hardware issues, if any?
Actually, it's not the silicon. The biggest bottleneck has become the silver used to pull the electricity out of the solar cell, and people are working on using replacing the silver with copper plating, but these are all issues that can be resolved.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why silicon is so popular is, like you said, it's obtained from sand.
Which is pretty abundant, but is it limitless? Is it finite, the amount of sand in the world?
Not the silicon. The big, like I say, the big issue happens to be silver contacts. Mm-hmm. That's the right now the research going into to replacing the contacts, because people are taking a longer view, and silicon is definitely a material that will never run out of. The only supply problem is the fact that the U.S. and other Western countries got enraptured by nuclear power, and so they looked at solar as something maybe 1,000 years from that 50s. But
so where would you like things to go next, since you do have such a broad knowledge of some key components of our survival? And that's how to protect our very thin atmosphere from greenhouse gases and utilizing the sun in large part. I'm sure you don't think that's the only renewable energy option. What should be happening right now that's not yet happening?
Well, what should be happening is we have as a colleague said, right now we can produce, like I say, electricity cheaper by sunlight than by any other method. And so it's just a matter of transitioning. We're at a period like maybe 1910 or 1915 when people were and still there weren't sufficient, say, gas stations, and there still weren't sufficient roads for the automobile. In fact, people laugh when they passed a car that they ran out of gas, or a car that had a flat tire when they passed them in their like horse and buggy, saying, this will never happen. We have to basically, it's basically a question of closed minds and special interests, and a question of educating the public that solar is now the least expensive of all the energy sources. And what makes it so is the fact that it's a electronic, like a power source. It's a quantum power source. The only quantum power source that we have today that's based on quantum mechanics, which has basically superseded thermal science. Basically, what happens is Einstein discovered that light comes down in two components, waves and particles, and the particles are energized by the wavelengths that they come down with. And those particles are what we call photons, and they are the material. Well, they're not really a material, they're the power source that generates the electricity in a solar cell. And,
Well,
and also the sun is not going to run out of power. And also what I find really fascinating, and no one's thought about this, is that actually everybody's talking about fusion in the future, while today the solar panels are actually harvesters of fusion power from the fusion reactor safely located 93 million miles away, which we call the sun.
And there's no damage from a solar spill.
No, I mean, what do you mean by there's no damage from a solar spill?
I mean, it's a joke, but like if there's a solar spill, unlike an oil spill, wildlife's not going to die. Water bodies are not going to get polluted. It's safe. I mean, there's no danger to solar panels I'm aware of.
I'm glad you mentioned water, because that's one of the greatest waster of water is the thermal ways of producing electricity. As you notice that all coal plants, all gas plants, all nuclear plants have to be next to some body of water, because you have to cool down the condenser to continue the cycles of producing electricity. And the beauty of solar cells is there are no boilers. It's just the interaction of photons hitting a material that is less than the width of a human hair.
So, John, this series of interviews that I'm privileged to get to do, and it's a true honor to interact with you and to learn from your incredible wisdom. And we are going to put links to your books and your talk. So if anyone wants to follow up, and I encourage our viewers to learn more, because we can't possibly go deep into certainly quantum physics. I'm not qualified. But I'd like you to just do two things. One, if you could just give the names of your books so people can know where to find you if they'd like to do that right away. And also, I'd like to end each interview with our solutionaries asking, what would you like to see people do, average citizens who are very concerned about this crises, and crises, multiple ecological crises? Yes.
What I think would be really nice to do if people, it's getting more and more more, it's actually cheaper than any other form of electricity is to put panels on their roofs. But and this is interesting too, because more and more of that the power companies are embracing photovoltaics. They're making it harder and harder for people to be individual producers. What's really beautiful about solar is, and this is what really has very much enticed me, is that you can, it's sort of like Legos. Like in a power plant, you can't like go build like say one lot of a electric generating plant. But in solar photovoltaics, you can like build exactly, configure exactly how much power you need, and then configure your solar cell or your solar panels to that power need.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what makes it so unique. And that's another new fight that's looming, is that power companies are more and more embracing solar, but on a big scale. And so they're trying to, you might say, own the sun.
Well, there's also all kinds of leasing options now. It doesn't have to be expensive up front anyway. So people certainly are hopeful aware of that or can look into it. You have a son. I don't know how old he is now, but I read something where your key motivation for you was trying to make the world sustainable, a better place, so that he can grow up into the magical place that we were lucky enough, for the most part, to be in. How old is he, and are you still hopeful or optimistic, or even working for that day? Do you see coming in your lifetime, if not his, or his if not yours?
Okay, first of all, my son's 31 years old. He has a PhD in organic chemistry from UCLA, and yeah, I mean, I want him to grow up in a society that's based on reason rather than this is like emotion, as we see today with COVID, and as we see today with everything else in the world.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we don't have time to get into for sure as we close, but the environmental hidden drivers behind the pandemic, the destruction of wildlife habitat and the pushing of humans, ever closer to wildlife habitats and different kinds of animals being closer together. It's a breeding ground for viruses, and now we're seeing Omicron just arise. Is this going to be what our future is until we start living in balance with nature?
Well, actually,
last question. No small last question there.
Actually, you're like like a shill for me to talk about my fourth book, because in September of next year, Patagonia Books is doing an updated version of my book called A Forest Journey, the story of trees and civilization. And one of the new parts of the book is how deforestation resulted in the coronavirus. That I've studied really intensely and got to know the various players. And it's, the forest is sort of like the ultimate social distancer. And once we, get into the, break into the forest is where all the viruses are. But also, what it causes is the decimation of the ecosystem, which is our protector, because when the ecosystem is working like it is in the natural forest, the specialized predators are able to keep down any kind of reservoirs, which are in the more generalized animals. And then when we upset that, we create a huge reservoir of these generalized animals, which are like mosquitoes, or are like rats, mice, In fact, all the diseases, like for example, you take Lyme disease, is a result of the fragmentation of the forests in the East Coast. So,
So
so what I'm trying to say is, as I did this new edition of a forestry, which is coming out next September, I realized that everything is a system. And then if you, it's sort of like rubber bands. If you break one rubber band, all the other rubber bands get out of sync. And that's exactly what happened with COVID.
mhm. So I would really like to have you back to go deeper into that, because not enough environmentalists really talk about that piece. And before we come out of this, and it looks like we may never, this being pandemic atmosphere, people need to understand that if you don't care about climate, you don't care about conservation, you probably do care about coronavirus and COVID. And who wants to see more pandemics? So we ought to be educating everybody, connecting these dots, talking about solutions, what everybody can do, so we don't create more of this, but start turning the corner.
Well, ironically, like, and this is what really got me into the research of the forest and COVID, was there was a paper that was published in 2018 in Frontiers in Microbiology that had this really tantalizing article. It was called Bats, Deforestation, and Coronavirus. And
Yeah.
that was in fact, also a much maligned person, Peter Daszak, who is probably one of our best people, and that's the horror of this whole period. He actually solved a similar epidemic in Malaysia in 1997, and also his group could actually determine which area in Africa would get Ebola by the state of the forest.
I'm so glad you mentioned him. I want to get Peter Daszak on. Of course, he runs the Eco Health Alliance out of New York. He spent a lot of time in China and in some of those labs working with bats, as you said. But he got me very excited when I heard him quoted on Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman's show. This was over a year ago, pretty early on in the pandemic. He said, if you think that a vaccine is going to stop these viruses from mutating, you're wrong, very naive. He said, so long as we have a sick planet, we're going to have sicker people. And as long as we're not living in harmony with nature, meaning more, destruction of wildlife habitats, all that, we're going to have more of this. And I thought that would be kind of a, stop the presses quote that would get more media attention. And it really didn't. And so I'm so glad you brought him up. And I'm so glad you could join us today. And yes, we could go on. But I just want to thank you for being, a guest, and for being so knowledgeable, and for helping us understand these things a lot better. And if you could just quickly give the titles of all your books,
Okay.
and then we'll let you go.
Okay, great. Okay, the first book I wrote was called A Golden Thread, 2,500 Years of Solar Architecture and Technology. And that is listed in Wikipedia as a landmark for the development of solar energy in 1980. Then learning from the fact that people changed over from solar, from say wood fuel to solar, inspired me to look into the second book, which was called The Forest Journey: The Story of Wood and Civilization. That became a Harvard classic, and was chosen as one of Harvard's 100 great books, along with E.O. Wilson and Stephen Jay Gould. And then wrote the book From Space to Earth: The Story of Solar Electricity, which shows how photovoltaics developed from the 1870s to the time it was written in 1999. And then in 2013, Let It Shine, the 6,000-year story of solar energy, which is coming out in paperback with a forward by Mark Jacobson in February of next year. And the difference between a golden thread and Let It Shine is I was continuing my research, as I always do, with the topics even after they're published. And it's like maybe 300 more pages than a golden thread, and also including Asia and China as well. And so that's
That's a lot.
yeah, and so forestry, which includes the new material, just as we were speaking about for example, forest health and human health is coming out in September of next year by Patagonia Book.
Thank you so much, John Perlin, for sharing your wisdom with us. You've raised our eco IQ 10 points, I'm sure. And I call people who are really smart and they work in some area of the green world, greeniuses. And you are my first greenius to be on Green TV for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and you're still a young guy. So I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. But especially as a man, thank you so much for what you're doing to raise awareness about Eunice Foote. That makes you really, really cool.
Well, I'd like to say that I have a manuscript. I'm just looking for a publisher for the Eunice Foote story, and it's a story that encompasses so many issues, both climate change, science, and women's rights. Because Eunice Foote was one of the pioneers of the women's rights movement. In fact, she was one of the key people with Cady Stanton, who not only participated in the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, but also she, along with Cady Stanton, were tasked with writing up the proceedings and being published by the press, North Star Press, which was the press of Frederick Douglass.
Well, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and just your focus on all these really important to this moment issues. And we will have you back. And also want to acknowledge CFA Weiss, our incredible tech and producer person behind the scenes. Also Jonathan Lake, who is the one who created greentv.com. Certainly he had the wisdom and the foresight to purchase the Green TV website, the URL anyway, many, many years ago. And he has joined forces with me, and we have a great green team. I don't have time to mention all of them, but I will at some point, who are very excited to bring you green news and views you can use that you'll never see on the news networks, no matter how much they try to catch up. So that's what Green TV is. It's about solutions. It's about what you can do, but it's bringing you the stories in between the headlines and in between the extreme weather events. And there are so many, we will never, never run out. Have a great green day, everybody. Do good green deeds, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.